Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where we're pressure testing the case for websites as the new work artifact. A lot of office work still ends up frozen in PDFs, slide decks, and spreadsheet attachments that start aging the second they get sent. The claim here is that AI changes the economics enough that the default output stops being a file and starts being a live website. The strongest part of the thesis is pretty simple. Publishing used to carry overhead, and now a lot of that overhead is collapsing. If a knowledge worker can describe what they want and get a decent interactive site, dashboard, or explainer in minutes, then the old excuse that a website is too expensive or too specialized gets weaker fast. That matters because documents were often a compromise, not an ideal format. They were easy to make, easy to email, and culturally accepted. So the real question isn't whether websites are theoretically better, it's whether AI makes them cheap enough, fast enough, and normal enough to win by default inside everyday work. On the merits, the case is strong. A website is interactive, linkable, and updatable by default. A PDF or deck captures a moment. A site can keep changing underneath the same address, which is useful if the information is actually alive. The examples here track that logic pretty well. A spreadsheet becomes a dashboard instead of a static export, a sales proposal becomes a microsite with adjustable pricing, and a competitive analysis becomes a living hub instead of a quarterly dump. None of that is magic, it's just a better match between the medium and the job. The caveat is that a lot of work products are supposed to be fixed. Compliance, legal review, and historical accountability often depend on preserving exactly what was said at a given time. So live by default is an advantage when recency matters, and a liability when auditability matters more. The push for one canonical URL is probably the most immediately persuasive operational point. Anyone who's dealt with plan_v2, plan_final, plan_final_revised, and plan_final_v8 knows the problem isn't just messy naming, it's distributed uncertainty about which copy is real. A stable URL that always points to the latest version lowers that cognitive load and cuts down on manual merges, stale attachments, and meetings whose hidden purpose is just reconciling documents. But there's a trade-off here too. If the canonical page updates in place, people need confidence that important changes are visible, attributable, and reversible. Without changelogs, snapshots, or permission controls, one source of truth can quietly become one source of confusion. So canonical URLs solve version sprawl only if version history still exists underneath the clean surface. The links versus attachments argument is less glamorous, but it's real. Links avoid compatibility issues, bulky downloads, duplicate storage, and the little bits of friction that add up when files bounce between email, Slack, calendars, and phones. A link is also easier to route across systems. You can drop it almost anywhere and expect it to open. That said, attachments persist, partly because they feel durable and controllable. If I send you a file, I know what you received. With a link, access can break, permissions can change, and the content can mutate after the fact. So the convenience case for links is strong, but the trust model has to be rebuilt with access stability, archivability, and clear ownership. Another claim is that one site can serve multiple audiences better than multiple separate documents. That makes intuitive sense. Executives want a summary, operators want action items, analysts want raw tables, and forcing all of that into one linear deck usually satisfies nobody. A web artifact can route people by role, urgency, or depth, which means fewer parallel versions tailored for each stakeholder. The upside is efficiency and consistency. Everybody starts from the same underlying source instead of a family of semi-divergent files. The risk is that personalization can hide disagreement or obscure what different stakeholders are actually seeing. If the executive view strips out uncertainty while the analyst view contains caveats, that's not just better navigation, that's a governance problem. So multipath design is useful, but only if the underlying evidence remains accessible and the summary layers don't become spin layers. The integrated context point gets at something deep about knowledge work. A lot of time is lost, not analyzing information, but hunting for it. If one site can gather spreadsheets, memos, email threads, tabs, and supporting material under one URL, that reduces context switching and speeds up decisions. This is plausible because fragmented tools create hidden taxes. Every jump between formats and folders is a small reset. Still, aggregation has limits. Pulling everything into one environment can help with access, but it can also create bloated pages, permission tangles, and a false sense that proximity equals synthesis. Putting information in one place is not the same as making it coherent. The best version of this idea isn't just accumulation. It's structured context, where source material, summary, and action paths are intentionally connected. Embedding actions directly in the artifact is where the website model starts to differ materially from a document model. If a report recommends approving a budget, booking a meeting, triggering a workflow, or updating a system, doing that from the page removes a handoff. That can tighten the loop between analysis and execution, which is often where momentum dies. The analytics layer matters too. Reads, clicks, searches, and shares create feedback on whether the artifact is being used and where people get stuck. But this is also where incentives get messy. Once artifacts are measurable, people may optimize for engagement rather than clarity, or treat click data as stronger evidence than it really is. A low click rate can mean irrelevance, confusion, or simply that the audience got what it needed immediately. So instrumentation is valuable, but interpretation needs restraint. The modularity argument is one of the more strategic ones. Instead of recreating similar content in separate files, teams can reuse sections as client hubs, internal playbooks, public portals, or training modules. That avoids the familiar decay where copied documents drift apart and nobody knows which chain is healthy anymore. Granular permissions and public-private views make that more realistic because not every audience should see the same layer of detail. The benefit here is compounding. Content becomes infrastructure rather than a disposable one-off. The constraint is organizational discipline. Modular systems are powerful when naming, ownership, and maintenance are clear. Without that, they turn into sprawling intranets with better branding. The final claim is about machines, not people. If bot traffic now exceeds human traffic on the web, then HTML becomes more important because agents can parse it more reliably than PDFs, CSVs, or slide files. That directionally makes sense. Web-native structure is generally easier for software to crawl, link, and act on than legacy Office formats that were built for human viewing first. Still, this argument needs precision. CSV is actually very machine-friendly in many contexts, just narrow in what it represents. PDFs and PowerPoints are the more brittle examples. The stronger version of the claim is not that every old format is unusable, but that web-native artifacts are better containers for mixed content, metadata, navigation, and actions in an agent-driven environment. If automated systems increasingly fetch, summarize, and trigger workflows, then publishing into HTML is not just a presentation choice, it becomes an interoperability choice. Taken together, the core case mostly holds up. Websites are better suited than static files for living information, cross-tool distribution, mixed audiences, embedded actions, and machine access. What remains unproven is how completely that displaces documents rather than sitting on top of them. A lot of institutions still need frozen records, explicit approvals, and offline portability. Those needs do not disappear because publishing got easier. So the likely outcome is not that every document dies, it's that many documents stop being the primary artifact and become exports, snapshots, or compliance residues of a web-native source. If that shift happens, the real winners won't just be the tools with slick AI generation. It'll be the systems that combine easy publishing with governance, history, permissions, and trustworthy structure. That's it for this one from Podkey Slopcast. If websites really are becoming the default unit of work, the interesting part isn't the demo, it's the workflow that survives contact with real organizations. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.